Hey there, all you fantastic flop hunters. Welcome back to Broadway by Ghostlight. I'm Mark Benani, and today I thought it would be fun to talk about 5 legendary flops seen briefly on the Great White Way. So briefly, in fact, that all 5 shows combined only total 30 performances. Yikes.
That is not great.
It sucks.
Now, no one, of course, sets out to write a flop musical, but with subject matter ranging from religious relics to galactic space adventures to bloody wartime massacres, these 5 musicals were just too much for Broadway audiences. But were these shows massive musical mistakes or diamonds in the rough ahead of their time? I'll let you be the judge of that. I would love to have done full breakdowns of these shows, as I've always been fascinated by legendary Broadway bombs, but sadly the 5 shows I'm talking about today don't have cast recordings or scripts available.
That sucks.
But maybe that's for the best. Let's take a look at some costly musical misfires that grace the boards for a brief shining moment.
Hold on to your butts.
Dennis Cunningham on CBS News started his review of Into the Light, a new musical that had opened that night, by saying, "Not since Springtime for Hitler, I think." And the rest of the reviews followed suit.
Into the Light is one of the darkest moments in Broadway history. The only miracle here is how this show got to Broadway. And heaven only knows it will take an act of God to make it survive beyond tonight. As a test of faith, this show is ludicrous, and as a test of endurance, it will drive even the most devout theater-goer to the exit.
Into the Light has a definite evangelical point of view. That's fine. Where it fails is as a musical. I didn't feel anything other than boredom and a little sorrow watching Into the Light.
My jaw dropped throughout this amateurish and appalling work. Not the worst musical I've ever seen, but quite possibly the most embarrassing.
Into the Light opened on October 22nd, 1986 at the Neil Simon Theater. The unlikely subject matter for the musical? The Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin is a real-life relic that some people believe to be the shroud that Jesus was buried in after his crucifixion, and that the face of Jesus was somehow imprinted on the cloth. Its veracity has been hotly debated by believers and non-believers alike, as you can imagine, which is where most of the musical's intended tensions lie. The show was about a scientist named James Prescott, who leads an expedition to determine whether the shroud is real or not. He becomes obsessed with the task while neglecting his wife and young son, the latter of which apparently is so lonely without his dad that he invents an imaginary friend. The imaginary friend was, as one reviewer put it, sadly not actually imaginary, but a mime who often appeared along with distracting green lasers, and whose antics, it seems, were not a welcome distraction from the lecture-like musical. Leading the show as the faith-tested physicist was none other than Dean Jones. Broadway babies know Dean Jones best as the original Bobby in Sondheim's Company, but to most, he's probably best remembered today for his many family-friendly Disney films of the 1960s, like the Herbie the Love Bug series, That Darn Cat, and my personal favorite, The Ugly Dachshund. But nothing could have saved this ill-advised musical. Critics ripped the score, calling it monotonous and in the style of loud wallpaper. In regards to the book, one critic said that it makes the dialogue in the Carousel of Progress at Disney World look like it was written by Tennessee Williams. Oh man. Only the little boy playing the young son, Danny Gerard, got any love from anyone. As for Dean Jones, he didn't get trounced too hard in the press, but as another critic put it, no star can carry a show that asks whether God is dead in a manner that would bore him to death if he's not.
Oh, snap!
Into the Light closed on October 26, 1986, after only 6 performances. While Into the Light seems to have had no one in its corner rooting for it, the same can't be said of our next show, the rock opera The Lieutenant. The Lieutenant opened at the Lyceum Theater on March 9, 1975, and closed 1 week later after 9 performances. And yet, the show boasted good reviews from the major critics and was even nominated for 4 Tony Awards that year, including Best Actor, Best Book, Best Score, and Best Musical. So, what happened?
Why have I never heard of this?
Well, money, or lack thereof, of course, is always the answer. The show was a hit way off Broadway in Flushing Meadows, Queens, in New York, and came to Broadway with only enough money in the bank to last them through rehearsals, 1 week of previews, and 1 week of performances. Certainly not a great business strategy. But with the great reviews, it should have at least had a go of it. Clive Barnes wrote in the New York Times that the show has a passion and vitality not seen much nowadays, and that it deserves to do well. Another critic in the Long Island Press said, "If you never see another musical, you must see this one." The real problem, I think, was the difficult subject matter of the sung-through piece. The musical dealt with the then just-ended Vietnam War, specifically the My Lai massacre and the court-martialing of Lieutenant William Calley. A sadly real-life tragedy. The massacre at My Lai in Vietnam was a war crime committed by the United States in which a battalion of US soldiers brutally murdered over 500 Vietnamese civilians, mostly elderly men, women, and young children. The horrific act was initially covered up by the US military for over a year, but when details of the incident were reported to the press, only Lieutenant Calley was prosecuted, who claimed he was only following orders. The Brechtian rock opera told the story while attempting to ask who was really to blame, Calley or the military at large. It's a fascinating show, very much evoking the sound of musicals like Jesus Christ Superstar, with the leading man needing to be able to shred high notes like a rock star. The man who starred as the title character of the Lieutenant was Eddie Mecca, who, after his Tony nomination for the role, would move on to Hollywood and land the memorable role of Carmine Ragusa in the long-running sitcom Laverne and Shirley. A cast recording was made for the Lieutenant, but unfortunately it was never released.
Why would they do this?
Show titles like Into the Light and The Lieutenant are solid and don't immediately strike a note of dread in theatergoers. But somehow, I can't imagine anyone in 1979 entering the Minskoff Theater, sitting down in their seat and looking at their playbill that read, "Got to Go Disco," and thinking, "I smell a hit." And a hit it was not. Got to Go Disco was the brainchild of Jerry Brandt, a music promoter, agent, manager, and club owner. Notice I didn't say anything about theater experience in there. The show he ushered to Broadway against its will was a sort of Cinderella-type story about a girl named Cassette.
I'm sorry, what?
Yes, Cassette, who sells clothes by day and is turned into the queen of the nightclub at night. Not only did Jerry Brandt not have any theatrical experience, neither did the team he assembled to bring the show to life. Amateurs abounded, from the first director / set and costume designer Joe Eula, a famed poster designer and graphic artist, to the show's book writer John Zadro, who had never written a musical before and recently lived in a monastery for 9 years.
As one does.
To the cast of unknowns, including the actual doorman and bartender from Studio 54, the musical's clear inspiration. As Stephen Gaines laid it out in a 1979 article for New York Magazine, the disco dancing disaster featured an inexperienced staff, 2 unknown stars, 2 directors, 3 scriptwriters, 3 choreographers, 11 composers, a cast of 36, and a $500,000 set with a dance floor that fills with 3,000 gallons of water and jackknifes towards the audience.
Damn!
If the show was bad, at least it didn't sound boring. Critics called it not suitable for theater audiences and pure trash, and it quickly closed after 8 performances. While no cast recording of Got to Go Disco was made, the title song from the show would be released as a single, and one of its unknown stars, Irene Cara, would go on to great fame indeed. Unfortunately for Miss Cara, we're not done with her yet, as she appeared in the chorus of another iconic flop in the 1970s. But while Got to Go Disco was trying to tell a very of-the-moment story with its disco beat, the musical Via Galactica from 1972 was looking to the future. The year 2972, to be exact. Via Galactica told the story of Gabriel Finn, a garbage man who takes the Earth's trash out into orbit using his spaceship called Helen of Troy. Dissatisfied with life on Earth, he goes to live on a distant asteroid named Ithaca with other social outcasts. There, the leader of Ithaca, Dr. Isaacs, who is nothing but a living head, wishes Gabriel to mate with his wife named Omaha and give him an heir. Gabriel falls in love with the wife of the literal head of the asteroid and must decide whether to leave Earth for good and join his love on a giant space ark to colonize a far-off star. Confused? Well, so were the first few preview audiences. So much so that a detailed plot synopsis had to be inserted into all the playbills prior to opening night, though it reportedly did more harm than good. Via Galactica opened on November 28, 1972, and was the very first show to open at the brand new Uris Theater, now named the Gershwin Theater, where Wicked has seemingly set up permanent residency. One of my favorite little tidbits in musical theater history is that Via Galactica was originally titled Up. But when the show booked the new theater, the name of the show had to be changed, otherwise the marquee would have boldly proclaimed Up Uris. The title was the least of the show's concern, though. During previews, the show's fly rigging and pyrotechnics for its numerous special effects frequently failed. One actor got stuck in a spaceship set piece hovering over the stage for over 20 minutes until stagehands were able to free him. The sets and actors frequently crashed through the stage floor, which had been outfitted with trampolines to simulate the sense of weightlessness in space. And at one performance, the wireless microphones, a very new thing on Broadway then, had its frequency crossed with the local police precinct, resulting in the audiences not hearing the singing, but instead hearing emergency calls about robberies set to music.
This is no good. This is no good.
Surprisingly, the conceiver and director of this insane piece was Peter Hall, the former head of the Royal Shakespeare Company and future head of the National Theatre, who was then making his American directorial debut. The score for the completely sung-through rock opera was by Galt MacDermot, who had written the much-lauded score to Hair. 1972 was a rough year for the rock composer, though. A few months before Via Galactica would open and close, McDermott's musical Dude had also closed after playing only 5 weeks. As you can imagine, the reviews for Via Galactica were scathing. But as with a lot of Broadway flops, the only person to make it out of Via Galactica somewhat unscathed was its leading man, none other than Raul Julia.
I am that fool.
While none of the 4 shows I've talked about so far made it to 2 weeks of performances, the last show on our list didn't even make it to opening night. Starting previews on January 6, 1989 at the Neil Simon Theater, the musical Senator Joe would close the next day, January 7th, after only 3 preview performances. Senator Joe referred to Senator Joseph McCarthy and his infamous communist witch hunt in the 1950s. The wild musical would take place inside the mind of the senator and feature a cast of 16 playing several different figures, both real and fictional, such as Richard Nixon, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Ricky Ricardo. The most memorable number for the few people who saw the show was one in which legendary broadcast journalist Edward R. Murrow gave audiences a guided tour of Joe McCarthy's alcohol-damaged liver, with the ensemble playing roles like Fatty Deposit and Dancing Enzymes. Oh man. The show was intended to play in repertory with another seemingly biblical-themed musical titled Nimrod and the Tower of Babel, but with Senator Joe's rapid closing, that show was never seen. Senator Joe came from Tom O'Horgan, a big-time director in the 1970s with his hits like Hair and Jesus Christ Superstar. By 1989, however, he had fallen from grace after the mega flop Dude, which I'd mentioned earlier. Besides directing Senator Joe, O'Horgan provided the music too, which is kind of surprising, and the book and lyrics were by Perry Arthur Kroger. Kroger had been an actor who was cast in a 1977 revival of Hair that O'Horgan helmed, and the two developed a close relationship. The musical, according to Mr. Kroger, was never meant for Broadway, and was really meant to be more of a experimental and phantasmagorical evening of theater than people were expecting on the Great Bright Way at the time. But it was producer Adela Holzer, looking to make a big comeback, who pushed the show to Broadway. What was Miss Holzer making a comeback from, you ask? Prison. Yes, Miss Holzer, the producer of the aforementioned flop Dude, was a con artist and pathological liar. She had been convicted in 1981 on 7 counts of defrauding investors, down from the original 248 counts.
Sounds like a real piece of crap.
You said it.
By the end of the decade, though, she was out of jail and ready to lie her way back to Broadway, and she hitched her wagon to Senator Joe. Red flags abounded, like during rehearsals when no one was paid for several weeks, and then Holzer would randomly show up with garbage bags full of money and pay off everyone in the cast in cash. The out-of-town tryout in Pittsburgh had to be cut short because ticket sales were so bad that for one performance, only a single ticket had been sold. Ugh. Once reaching Broadway, however, no more trash bags of cash surfaced, and Holzer didn't have the funds needed to secure bonds that the Broadway unions require to guarantee payment, and the show was forced to shut down after 2 days. Holzer asserted, though, that the shutdown was only temporary and went out to raise more capital to get the show open. Shockingly, by the end of the month, Holzer called O'Horgan to tell him she had raised a whopping $750,000 and Senator Joe was back on. Not so shockingly, a couple of weeks later, while making a phone call in a phone booth, the cops closed in and arrested Adela Holzer for grand larceny. Apparently, she had been maliciously talking older couples into mortgaging their homes to invest in the show, telling them that her husband, David Rockefeller, was guaranteeing the money. She was, of course, not married to David Rockefeller and was just a skeezy slimeball. She was again convicted and sent back to prison. Now that's a story that might actually make a good Broadway musical.
I think you may have something here.
Which of these 5 shows would you want a full breakdown of if I could snaggle a script somewhere? I've always wanted to read the script for Senator Joe, which I know exists somewhere. Were any of you lucky, or I guess unlucky enough to see any of these shows? Please tell me all about it in the comments. I love hearing from you guys. There are plenty more off-the-wall Broadway flops I would love to cover, so let me know if you want a part 2 to this video. If you enjoyed it and found some value in it, you could really help me out and give this video a like. Click that little thumbs up button. It goes a long way to getting more people to see this video and my channel in general. I just hit 6,000 subscribers and I am so over the moon about it. Thank you so much to everyone who has subscribed and continue to support the channel. A special thank you to all my patrons over on Patreon. You guys help me out more than you could possibly know, with even more love going to Ryan James D in my producer circle. There is a link to my Patreon in the description of the video, as well as a link to some fun merch, which is one of the best ways to support me and Broadway by Ghostlight, and look amazing while doing it. I gotta say, look at this.
What a maroon!
If you like my content, sharing this video is also an amazing and incredibly impactful way to help the channel grow. And hey, if you didn't like this video, well, the only thing I've got to say to you is, up yours. But until next time, this is Broadway by Ghostlight. I'm Mark Bonanni. Thanks for watching.